Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the special CLE presentations organized by the Broward Attorneys Real Estate Council. I'm Annabella Barbosa, its president, and today we're gonna be hosting this meeting along with Jacqueline Revetz, our treasurer, and Kyla Kani, our secretary. Thank you for all great things you do for our organization. As many of you know, this event is part of a series of CLE presentations planned for this year because of the pandemic. These presentations are being shared with other real estate councils as part of a collaboration project. Today, members of Miami-Dade County REC are here with us, and I want to welcome their president, Vanessa Bertrand, and the Miami-Dade REC members who are attending this event today. Probably they haven't connected yet, but they will. They've registered for the event today. Also, we'd like to thank our loyal sponsors, BPM Property Management, Centennial Bank, and Next Gen Surveying for your continued support during this crazy year. Stacy Hamill is making a special appearance today. She's from Centennial Bank, and she would like to say a few words. Stacy?
Hi, Annabella. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Great. Okay. So I'm Stacy Hamill from Centennial Bank, and it is so great to be here. So this morning I was reading a quick article on thinking of cashing in on your real estate 2020. It talked a little bit about the housing market predictions. And as we all know, right, if we kind of owned our home for the last 10 years, we can expect to make double on our investment at this point. Real estate market is up in Florida anywhere from 20 to 24%. We're seeing a lot of purchases, refinances. We have a lot of clients purchasing Airbnbs right now for investment opportunity. And what does that mean to you as an attorney? Well, that means you guys are extremely busy. And I don't even know how we're on this call right now. It's the end of the month. You guys probably have a ton of closings. But you know, you're busy, so you do need that relationship. Very hands-on with my clients. They text, they call, they email. We do have a great one-on-one relationship. So service is the key at Centennial, and also fees, right? So as you guys are getting busier, of course, wire fees are going up, bank fees are going up, you have more volume. One of the things that we specialize in is reducing those fees. So if you ever want a second opinion, please reach out. I'm Stacy from Centennial Bank. Hopefully you all have my contact number. If not, call Annabella. I know she has it.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank
you for your continued support.
Thank you.
Well, today we have a unique and very interesting presentation about regulation of small unmanned aircraft systems, or drones, by our own BEREC member and esteemed friend, Peter Sabota. Jacqueline Revetz will provide us with a brief introduction of Peter, our speaker today. Jacqueline?
So very excited for today's presentation by Peter. Peter Sabota is an aviation and real estate attorney here in Fort Lauderdale. He earned his bachelor's degree in professional aeronautics from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, his Juris Doctor degree from my alma mater, Nova Southeastern University, Go Sharks. Peter has been a licensed pilot for more than 35 years and holds a commercial pilot certificate with multi-engine instrument and high performance ratings, and is a licensed Part 107 drone pilot. Prior to practicing law, Peter worked for nearly 10 years as a client server database analyst for CH2M Hill, which is a global environmental and engineering company. Peter's principal areas of focus are aviation law, real estate transactions, landlord-tenant matters, commercial litigation, and estate planning. Peter is a standing member of the Florida Bar Aviation Law Committee and a proud member and friend of the Broward County Bar Association, as well as the Broward Attorneys Real Estate Council. Let's all give a warm virtual welcome to Peter Sabota.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Thanks a lot. Let me go ahead and get this screen sharing going here.
Peter, I apologize. I forgot to mention that you're going to have your presentation and I'm going to monitor the chat group. And whoever has any questions, please put them in the chat feature. And I will take your questions, I will save them, and I will ask Peter all of the questions at the end of his presentation. So go ahead and write them in the chat, and then we'll get to them at the end. Thank you.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get this started. Okay, did that come up okay? Yes? Okay, great, wonderful. Again, I'm Peter Sabota, and I'd like to thank Annabella Barboza and all of the BEREC board members and our sponsor for hosting today's presentation and making this possible. I wanted to mention that if there's any specific questions you have or any other information you're looking for, there's links I'll be discussing as we go through to get certain information on the web. Feel free to visit my firm's aviation website, which is aviationlawflorida.com, aviationlawflorida.com, and you'll find links there and lots of other information as well. So let's get started. Today, we're going to talk about really what's the definition of a small unmanned aircraft system, the registration requirements, the remote pilot requirements, the operating limitations, flight restrictions, what happens if you don't follow the rules and the violation penalties, and then hopefully at the end, we're gonna have time for some questions. And now, the information in the presentation today is primarily coming from 14 CFR Part 107 and 14 CFR Part 48. And those two sections govern small unmanned aircraft systems and their registration requirements. So let's get started here. So what is a small unmanned aircraft system? It's defined as an aircraft operated without the possibility of direct human intervention from within or on the aircraft. And there's also, they come within a certain weight category. They have to weigh between 0.55 pounds and 55 pounds on takeoff, including everything that's on board or otherwise attached to the aircraft. So let's take a look at what we're really talking about here. These are typically, you see these quadcopters, and you generally refer to them as drones. But what's surprising is that this aircraft down on the bottom right side, this high-wing single-engine airplane, is also a small unmanned aircraft system, and it's governed by Part 107. So it's a bit of a surprise to certain hobbyists and remote control aircraft operators that they have been pulled into the definition of a small unmanned aircraft system. And they're certainly getting to be more and more popular. So here's some of the numbers. As of this month, there's 1.6 million registered unmanned aircraft systems in the United States. About a third of them are commercial, and about 2/3 of them are recreational. And we're also getting up near almost 200,000 remote pilots certified. Now, this is important, especially for realtors and for us as attorneys that deal with realtors. It's become very popular to use aerial photographs in real estate marketing, especially for those nice properties on the water or with like a nice view. And there was a time when a realtor could go to Walmart, pick up a drone, go out, take a few pictures, and they were good to go. And that's not the case anymore, because as we'll talk about when we get into the presentation, once you're using a drone for commercial purposes, you must have a license. You have to be licensed, otherwise you can face very stiff penalties. And we'll talk about some of the penalties as well. So we'll start off with registration requirements. All drones that are between 0.55 pounds and 55 pounds must be registered with the FAA. And it's very easy to do. There's a website you go to, you put in the information, it takes a few minutes and it costs $5 and you get your drone registered. The requirements are you have to be at least 13 years of age or older, which shouldn't be a problem for most of us. A US citizen or legal permanent resident. You provide your name, home address, email address, you pay the $5 registration fee, and you have an obligation to ensure that the information remains accurate. One note is if you are going to register a drone and you type in Google, drone registration, FAA, and the first thing that's going to come up is a website that looks a lot like the FAA's, but it's not. The site www.faadrone.org is not the FAA site, but somehow they've managed to land themselves at the top of the search engine pages. And they charge $29.99 for the registration, or $49.99 if you want to have them send you some stickers to put on your drone. So you don't need to do that. It's faadronezone.faa.gov. Again, there's a link to it at my aviation site, aviationlawflorida.com, but you only pay $5 to register a drone. Once you register the drone, you have to assign, you take the assigned registration number and you have to put it on the drone, similar to an N number on an aircraft. The registration is valid for 3 years. And there's a benefit if you're only using the drone for hobby or recreational use. You only have to register one drone or one unmanned aircraft system, and you could use that same registration number for all of the unmanned aircraft that you may have to use recreationally. So you don't have to spend $5 on every one. You get one number, but you put it on all of them and you're good to go. And it's important to know that you have to have proof of the registration, and it must be made available to authorities. And that's pretty much like your car. You know, you're driving your car, you have your registration on you. When you're flying a drone, you have to have the registration on you. And again, we'll talk about the penalties if you don't do that. Next, we'll talk about the remote pilot requirements. And these are broken down into 2 categories. There's requirements if you do not already have another license that's issued under Part 61, which is typically a pilot's license, commercial pilot's license, private pilot's license, sport pilot's license. And by the way, we do have a few pilots already on the call today. You might be surprised. I know Dale Bruschi's on the call, Mark Kushner's on the call. They're both licensed under Part 61. And then there's another requirement if you're not licensed under Part 61, or if you are licensed under Part 61, there's two different criteria for getting your drone pilot license. So we'll start with if you're not already licensed under Part 61. You have to be at least 16 years old, read, write, speak, and understand English. You have to be in a physical and mental condition to safely fly an unmanned aircraft system. You study the applicable rules and regulations, and just as an overview for non-Part 61 pilots, the topic areas: airspace classifications, flight restrictions, aviation weather, loading and performance, emergency procedures, radio communication procedures, performance of small unmanned aircraft, physiological effects of drugs and alcohol, aeronautical decision-making, airport operations, and maintenance and pre-flight inspection procedures. That's sort of the overview of the areas that you'll be studying for the test. And once you're ready, you schedule an appointment and you have to go to an FAA Knowledge Testing Center and be tested there. And hopefully you pass the test. And you also have to pass a TSA background check. And if everything goes well, you get one of these. And it looks very much like a pilot's license. It's a remote pilot's license. For those who already have a pilot's license, this will be separate. It's a different number, it's a different license, and they keep them separate. So if you're lucky enough to already be licensed under Part 61, it's much easier to get your drone license. You have to have a current flight review, which means within the past 24 months, you have to have completed a flight review. You go online and you complete a training course. You fill out Form 871013 online, and you make an appointment to meet to validate your identity. And once you do that, you have to bring the proof of your flight review, your online training course, your 871013, and a photo ID to one of 4 places. You can go to the Flight Standards District Office, which is the best place, I think, to go. Down here in South Florida area, the main office is out by I-75 near Miramar Parkway. That's where the Miami FSDO is located. You make an appointment, you go in there, and in 5 minutes you're out, and you have a temporary license, and they mail you a permanent license in a few weeks. You could also go to an FAA designated pilot examiner, an airman certification representative, or you could just go to a regular CFI, a flight instructor. But you have to be aware that if you go to a flight instructor, they cannot issue you a temporary certificate on the spot. they're essentially going to take all your information and they're going to mail it in to Oklahoma City. So that's going to take a few weeks. So if you're in any type of a hurry, you definitely want to go the route of going to the local FSDO and bringing all the materials in. For those who take the test, just as a note, if you don't pass the test the first time, it's not such a bad thing. You just have to wait 14 days and you could try again and you could take the test again, and hopefully you'd be successful in the second pass. A couple other things about pilot requirements. You have to renew your certificate every 2 years. And again, there's two different categories. If you don't have another Part 61 license, meaning you're not already a private pilot or a commercial pilot license holder, you have to take a knowledge test at a testing center. So you have to go back to the testing center every 2 years if you don't have another license. It's just a little bit more work to keep it current, but that's what the FAA tells us you have to do. And of course, you always have to keep a copy of that test report on you if law enforcement ever requests a copy of it. And then for the pilots who are already licensed under Part 61, you have to have a current flight review, which means within the preceding 24 months. You have to complete an online recurrent knowledge training course. And frankly, they let you go through the test over and over and over again until you get every one right. And then that's course completion. And you print out a certificate right from the website, and you're good to go. You have to keep a copy of that with you together with your license, and you're considered to be current. Now, there's one other category. We've talked about being licensed, and I've mentioned that it's a requirement to be licensed if you're going to use your drone or fly it for commercial purposes. And that would include going out and taking aerial photographs of properties, amongst other things. Now, if you're not doing any of those things and you're purely going to fly a drone for recreational purposes, there is an exception for recreational pilots. And these are the guidelines. You have to only fly for hobby or recreational use. You have to maintain, has to be operated in accordance with the community-based set of guidelines. And this is a bit of a changing set of guidelines. What it means is that there are organizations throughout the country, such as the American Hobbyist Model Aircraft Association, Academy of Model Aeronautics, and they post guidelines on how to operate safely. And as long as you're following their guidelines, meaning know who's around you, watch, operate safely, don't fly closer than don't fly over people, don't fly in a way that creates a hazard to others or property. And there's a list. And as long as you follow whatever organization you've chosen to follow their list, you're pretty much okay. You have to make sure you operate in a manner that doesn't interfere with and gives way to any manned aircraft. That's a big problem if you're operating in a way that can interfere with or create a safety hazard for an actually, an unmanned aircraft. Again, it's the same limitation as the registration requirements. You're limited to no more than 55 pounds. And here, the community-based organization can also have other exceptions if they've been approved by the FAA that you can operate within and be considered to be operating safely. You must always operate, in any case, in a manner that doesn't interfere with or, again, gives way to any manned aircraft. And if you're flying within 5 miles of an airport, and you're flying under a remote pilot exception for recreational pilots, the licensing exception, you have to provide the airport operator and the tower with prior notice that you'll be operating if you're within 5 miles. And again, no person may operate a model aircraft so as to endanger the safety of the national airspace system. So we talked about the registration requirements. We've talked about the piloting requirements. Let's move on to the operating limitations. What can you do with these things? Where can you fly them? First, there's a limitation on the speed that they can travel, 87 knots or 100 miles per hour. And frankly, that's pretty fast. I mean, if you see a drone going by at 100 miles an hour, it's pretty easy to miss it. They're very small, and when they're moving that fast, they're hard to see. You're required to always maintain a visual line of sight with the drone from the remote pilot or a visual observer. And a visual observer is defined as a second set of eyes, and the remote pilot and the visual observer must maintain effective communication with each other at all times. And either the remote pilot or the visual observer must always be able to see the unmanned aircraft system. So this is an example of where you're flying a drone and there may be an obstruction or something that you can't see behind. You're going to fly around a building or a big tree or some other obstruction, and you could have another person on the other side. You're on the cell phone with them, and once you lose direct visual contact, they can say, I've got it now, I see it, here's what it's doing. And as long as they maintain contact with you, that's acceptable. Drones can only be flown during daylight. And then there's also an exception for you could fly during civil twilight with appropriate anti-collision lighting. And for those of you who wonder what that means, civil twilight in the continental United States means 30 minutes before the official sunrise or 30 minutes after official sunset. You can fly within those periods. And as you start to get closer to the end of civil twilight, I can tell you it gets harder and harder to see that little drone flying around. You're limited to a maximum of 400 feet above ground level as a general rule, but there are a couple exceptions. And if you fly a drone within a 400-foot radius of a structure, you can go no higher than 400 feet above the structure's immediate uppermost limit. So what does that look like? Here's an example. So if you're flying a drone over a building, maybe it's a condo on the beach. Maybe you're doing aerial photography for real estate purposes of an office building, a condo. So you can fly up to 400 feet above the highest part of that structure, which would include if there was an antenna or some other thing attached to the building on top, you can go 400 feet above that highest point. And that just gives a little bit more flexibility for getting a little more altitude above the normal 400-foot limitation. You can't fly a drone unless you have at least 3 statute mile visibility. And again, it's always a requirement to have direct visual contact with your unmanned aircraft system. And for those of you who may have any experience with these, if you look at this little picture of a controller on the screen here, there's a video screen, and these unmanned aircraft systems have high definition real-time video that you're looking at while it's flying. But that doesn't qualify for direct visual communication with the drone. You have to be able to look up and see it. And that's a strict requirement for the line of sight requirement. Also, when they talk about 400 feet above a structure means a man-made object and does not include natural objects. So if you have, for example, a big tree and you say, well, gee, the tree's 75 feet high, I was flying at 475 feet, I must be good. No, trees do not count as structures. They must be man-made structures. Additional operating limitations, the minimum distance from clouds, something you don't think about too much. Down here below 400 feet, you're probably not going to get into too much trouble, but there is a requirement that you stay 500 feet below or 2,000 feet horizontally away from clouds. And the next section here, we'll get a little technical, but I'll break this down. I think it's at least it's interesting to go through. You can operate in Class G airspace without any permission from air traffic control. But if you're going to operate in Class B, C, D, or within the lateral boundaries of the surface area of Class E airspace, you're required to have air traffic control permission. And we'll talk about a couple different ways to get that permission, because you'll find that some premium properties, especially if you look down on the intercoastal, closer towards the beach, you're going to find that they lie underneath the airspace, or they're within the airspace of Fort Lauderdale International Airport. Maybe they're in the airspace of Pompano Airport. And if you want to fly over those properties to take pictures, you have to have permission if they're within the airspace. So this is just a sort of an overview of the airspace classifications in the United States. There's essentially 6. Class A is way up there. It starts at 18,000 feet and goes up to flight levels 600. That's probably not going to be where anyone's flying a drone. And then you could see the different classes of airspace over airports. Airports that have control towers are going to be categorized as either B, C, or D airspace. And to give you an example, down here in South Florida, North Perry Airport is a Class D airspace. Fort Lauderdale Executive, Class D, it's smaller. Fort Lauderdale International is a Class C airspace. And Miami International is Class B airspace. And you can see the airspace sort of looks like an upside down wedding cake as it branches out as you go up higher in the B and C. Class D is more just sort of like a cone over the airport. So everything that's not A, B, C, or D is going to be either G, or E. And the G is airspace along the ground that extends generally up to 1,200 feet. And then everything from there up to A that's not in one of the airport airspaces is Class E airspace. But Class G is the only airspace that's considered uncontrolled airspace. And anything other than Class G, you must have air traffic control permission, ATC permission to operate in. A few other limitations. You could use unmanned aircraft systems to transport property for compensation or hire. The requirement is that whatever is attached to the drone must be securely attached. It cannot adversely affect the flight characteristics or controllability. And if you want to use a drone to carry property for compensation or hire, and it's going to go beyond the visual line of sight, you actually have to become a Part 135 certified carrier, which for non-pilots, that's the same area of law that controls charter operations. So if you've flown like a charter to the Bahamas or a smaller charter service, any kind of helicopter, something small like that, that is non-scheduled service, but it carries passengers for hire, they're all controlled under Part 135, and they've swept into that the use of drones for commercial purposes to carry some kind of payload. And that's actually a very evolving market right now. The FAA is actively seeking input and feedback on different ways drones are being used or can be used to deliver medicine, to deliver goods to people that may have a difficult time getting them otherwise. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. There'll be a time when you go online and order something on Amazon.com, and one of these little guys shows up in front of your house with a package and brings it to you. And it sounds somewhat far-fetched now, but it's happening. It's already starting, and this is something that we're going to see a lot more of. As far as operating, you cannot operate more than one unmanned aircraft system at a time. And of course, with all these limitations, we're also going to talk about there's a way to get waivers for a lot of these things, but these are sort of the general rules, and without a waiver, you can't do these things. You cannot operate a drone from a moving vehicle unless it's over a sparsely populated area. No careless or reckless operations. No operations over persons. No operations where you've had alcohol within 8 hours before the flight. No weaponizing or carriage of hazardous materials. And you could see some people have actually gotten the idea to somehow weaponize drones. I mean, obviously the military does that, but there are ways to do it in a less sophisticated way. And you start to see some of the hazards of these little drones. I mean, they can carry things up to 55 pounds and quickly fly into an area. And if you did have some sort of weapon or hazardous material mounted on there, it could be a real danger. So it's something that is strictly controlled. And we'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about, again, about the violation penalties and what happens if you don't follow these rules. You're required to conduct a pre-flight inspection, check the propellers, make sure that everything's operating safely, the batteries are charged up. You always have a requirement to yield to other aircraft. and you have to check and comply with all the temporary flight restrictions. Now, these temporary flight restrictions come and go. They're issued to warn pilots or any other users of the national airspace system when there's a restriction on where you can operate. The most common is when the president or some other official comes into town. Essentially, they shut down the airspace for most operations. There was a TFR recently when the president came down, and it extended out over all of Weston, all of West Broward, and I was really surprised that and there's some apps, I'll show you how we check that, but you look and for an entire day it was like you can't fly your drone in this area. You're just completely shut down. Here's a story that was run in the Miami Herald earlier this year. You may recall this year that earlier this year the Super Bowl was held down here at Hard Rock Stadium, and this article in the Miami Herald reads, "Up to a year in prison for flying a drone. That's what a Weston man faces if convicted of flying his drone in temporary restricted airspace over Ocean Drive and 8th Street on South Beach. A Weston man was charged with violating the FAA's temporary flight restrictions set up to protect the public during Super Bowl 54 and the week leading up to the game. A U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida and a special agent in charge of the FBI's Miami field office announced these charges. The FBI says that the man illegally flew his drone into the temporary restricted airspace in Miami Beach without having the required authorization from the FAA. He's been charged with knowingly and willfully violating national defense airspace for flying his unmanned aircraft into an area where a TFR, or a temporary flight restriction, had been imposed. Now, the man said he just wanted to capture image of the Super Bowl related festivities down on South Beach, but I don't think that went very far with the FBI or the FAA. And the penalty for just taking that drone, taking it down by the beach and flying along the beach to take pictures of some of the crowds is potentially resulting in a 1-year prison sentence in addition to financial penalties, monetary penalties. So this is really serious stuff, and it's very important that whoever's operating a drone really understands what the operating limitations are. You could really get yourself in trouble quick if you don't. A couple other limitations here. You cannot operate in or around stadiums, and there's a standing restriction 1 hour before or 1 hour after the scheduled time of any of the following. Look at these: Major League Baseball, National Football League, NCAA Division I football, or any NASCAR event, Sprint Cup, IndyCar, Champ Series races. You cannot fly within a 3 nautical mile radius of the stadium. And if you look at this picture here, this is Hard Rock Stadium looking to the north. And if you look towards the top of the picture, that's Perry Airport right there. And the 3 mile radius extends just about to the edge of Perry Airport. It's that close to Hard Rock Stadium. There's also a restriction against flying near critical infrastructure facilities. That includes things like electrical power stations, substations, switching stations, electrical control centers. Any portion of an above ground oil or gas pipeline. Can't fly a drone. Another big problem, prisons and correctional institutions. People got clever, or actually, I guess to say, thought they were getting clever, and using drones to deliver things like contraband, weapons, cell phones, and dropping them into these prison yards for someone to go pick up. So you'll see when you look at the airspace maps or the restricted areas, you'll see a big circle around any prison or correctional institution. You can't fly a drone there. Again, you always have to check the temporary flight restrictions because they can come and go, and you just wouldn't know it unless you went online and actually checked it. You must always make a UAS available if the FAA requests it. That includes inspection or testing, and they could request any associated documents or records that are required to be kept. Of course, the registration requirements is probably the most significant of those. If you're operating a drone and you have some sort of issue, something goes wrong, you have to report it to the FAA within 10 days, which is very much like any other piloting requirement. This is limited to operations that result in a serious injury, loss of consciousness, or property damage of at least $500. And that doesn't include the drone itself. It's just whatever property you may have damaged. Just like with any other pilot certificate, you have the right to deviate from any of these rules in response to an in-flight emergency. The FAA says the emergency action should be taken in such a way to minimize injury or damage to property. And again, there's a reporting requirement where you must, upon request of the administrator, send a written report of the deviation. So next we'll talk a little bit about operations when you're in controlled airspace. When you want to operate somewhere where you otherwise would need air traffic control authorization. There's a system that the FAA has set up, and it's this low altitude authorization and notification capability. It's also known as the LANCE system, which is the FAA has gotten together with the drone industry essentially and come up with this mechanism to automatically give you authorization to operate without having to go through the process of submitting a request directly to the FAA and either through the website or on paper and waiting 2 to 3 weeks to get a response. This is pretty much instant feedback for getting authorization. So it allows drone pilots access to controlled airspace, still at or below 400 feet. It provides an awareness of where pilots can and cannot fly, and it provides air traffic control with the information as to who's operating there. And this is essentially how it works. There's an app that you download onto your smartphone, and that app coordinates the information from the FAA, and it also has a link to the FAA air traffic facility that you might be near. And you go into the app, you register, you put in your registration number of your drone, and you essentially pick a spot and say, hey, I want to operate in this airspace. I know it's close to Fort Lauderdale Airport. It would otherwise be prohibited, but I really want to take some pictures, or I want to operate a drone in this area. And you select the altitude, you select the quadrant that you want to operate in, and you submit that request. And usually within just a few minutes, you'll get back a response that says, okay, you're authorized to operate in this airspace. So it's a real convenient way to get real-time authorization, pretty much real-time, very quickly. I had to take some pictures with my drone at an event that was down in Cooper City, and it was within the airspace of North Perry Airport. North Perry does not participate in this LANCE system. I had to do it the hard way. I had to go online. I had to submit a request to the FAA. I had to ask for authorization and wait for them to get back to me. And fortunately, it came back probably within about a week. But this is a much easier way to do it. This is, if you look on the bottom, there's a link to the website. There's the URL. There's also a link to this on my law firm's aviation site, aviationlawflorida.com. You could find this in the links. And anyone can go here and take a look at this. This is pretty much a zoomed out view, and you could see the checkered areas, the green and red areas, are controlled airspace down to the surface for one reason or another. Usually it's, these are all airports in our example here. Let me zoom down a little bit. And as you zoom in on this, you'll start to see that the little boxes turn into maximum altitudes that you can operate. So if you look here, here's Weston near the center. As you start heading east towards the beach, you'll see that all those green boxes, that's the controlled airspace of Fort Lauderdale International. So if you look on a map and you see, for example, there's a property that you'd like to go take pictures of, or someone wants to go fly at a park or maybe down near the beach, you have to look here and see whether you're going to be able to get authorization to do that if you're within any of these boxes. Now, if you look down a little bit on an angle below Fort Lauderdale, like to the right below Weston, you'll see those checkered boxes that are red. That's the airspace in those top boxes for North Perry Airport. And the reason that they're red is because they don't participate in the Lance system. So you'd have to manually request authorization if you want to fly in any of those, because the controlled airspace goes all the way down to the surface. And it's surprising. Most people don't think about it like that. If you own a home in Pembroke Pines, for example, near Perry Airport, and you know, you bought your kid a drone for a birthday present or to go out and play with, that's going to be a problem. You can't fly it there, even though you're in your own backyard. You know, you're still in federal airspace once you leave the ground. So we could zoom down a little bit more. This is a closer view of Fort Lauderdale International Airport. And you could see down near the bottom, you see Dania Beach Boulevard. All that area, 0, 0, 0. All these boxes with a 0, you are not allowed to fly at all. You're not going to get authorization from air traffic control. So that includes, if you look, Dania Beach, the Dania Pier, the state park to the north of Dania Beach. Any of those areas, this system allows you to very quickly look and see where you can and cannot operate, or where you can get authorization to operate directly from air traffic control through the Lance system. This is an interesting example. The Lance system is not available. This is Key West, Florida. And if you look at Key West, there's nowhere you can fly a drone down there. Everything is prohibited. You either have Key West International Airport, you have Naval Air Station Key West, a little bit to the northeast of that, and there's just a complete shutdown. So if you're heading to Key West and you think this is going to be a lot of fun, we're going to take the drone and we're going to take some really cool pictures down by the water of Key West, don't take it with you, leave it home. It's all restricted airspace down there.
Peter, I am so fascinated by all this. We have about 5 minutes left of the presentation so that we can have time for all the questions.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Jackie. Now, with all the limitations, it's sort of like what the FAA taketh away, the FAA can giveth back. And what they do here is there are a number of operations that are otherwise prohibited that you can specifically ask for authorization to operate, notwithstanding the restriction. So here's some of them: moving vehicles, daylight operation only. So under Part 107.29, it's only daylight operations. But what if you have a car lot or a steel mill yard where you want to go out there and inspect some of your products and you want to do it at night? You can request authorization. The FAA wants you to spell out how you're going to operate safely. Maybe you're going to tell them, I'm going to put lights, I'm going to have the yard lighted, I will only operate no higher than 75 feet above the ground, whatever it may be. And they're pretty good about giving waivers. Some of these, if you look at this one, operations over people, I've looked at the waivers that are issued for that. And one of the requirements is your drone has to have a ballistic parachute that can deploy in case you have some kind of failure, that it's not going to come crashing down into the crowd of people. But it is something that is possible. So this, I'll just move through these quickly. As far as penalties, I want to talk about this. Look at this: civil penalties, $27,500 up to $27,500 per violation, and up to $20,000 if it's a violation that interferes with wildlife suppression, law enforcement, emergency response efforts. This is a big problem whenever they're flying helicopters in for fire suppression to bring water in. If they spot a drone, they have to shut the entire operation down until they clear the area. So it can be a big problem for the wildfire suppression. You have the same issues with law enforcement or any kind of emergency response. It can result in a suspension or revocation of your pilot certificate if it was intentional or reckless, or if it was repeated non-compliance, or if you've shown an unwillingness to correct the non-compliance after you've been warned by the FAA. This gets a little tougher here. Criminal penalties: $250,000 or imprisonment for up to 3 years. criminal penalties includes failure to register your drone. It's really serious stuff, and it's getting even more serious as you know, drones can just be more and more of a danger to the public. One thing I want to mention is Florida's Freedom from Unwanted Surveillance Act. There were problems with drones. You know, your neighbor's flying a drone over your pool and your teenage daughter's laying out there, that kind of thing. And there is Florida law that has now stepped in. You can file a claim under the Freedom from Unwanted Surveillance Act, and you can read more about it under 934.50. But the key thing in that, especially for us attorneys, is that they've added a fee provision in there. So if you have to sue your neighbor or someone in the neighborhood for flying and conducting unwanted surveillance of you or your home, or you know, in your yard or your home, you can shut it down, and that includes unwanted surveillance from law enforcement if they don't have a warrant. They're also subject to being shut down. It's just a way to create a little bit more safety. Last slide here. I wanted to put this in there. I thought it was interesting as a current issue. In April, this was the Daytona Beach and another police department in Connecticut. They unveiled drones that are capable of taking your temperature from up to 300 feet in the air. And this was designed to try to look at crowds and pick people out that they think may have COVID-19. And these are examples of how a drone can, with a infrared detector, can look and spot someone in the crowd and say, hey, this person has a fever, you know? And this raised all kinds of issues, and there was a lot of backlash from mainly civil liberty groups. And they say they warned about the big doctor in the sky singling people out when you might have a fever for some other reason. You might have the flu, you might have some other ailment. Doesn't mean you have COVID-19. And eventually these police departments shut it down. They didn't end up using this. And interesting, especially for the lawyers here, the case of Kylo was a very similar case where thermal imaging was used to detect heat coming from a suspected grow house. There was helicopters that used infrared cameras, and this went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, let me go back, the Supreme Court said that it's a Fourth Amendment search to look at a house and detect the heat coming off of it with an infrared camera. And that was considered, you need a warrant to do that. So it raises questions. It's some sort of something to think about if police are going to use cameras to check the temperature of people. Is that a search? I mean, if heat coming off your house is considered an unreasonable search without a warrant, how about the heat coming off of you or your forehead or your body? So it's just something to think about. And this didn't kind of go up as an issue because the police agencies decided to not pursue that. With that, thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Again, www.aviationlawflorida.com has links to all of these things if you want to go there and check it out, and you could find some of these things on your own and have some fun. Go out and buy a drone.
Wow, that was excellent. So that's a lot of information. We do have some good questions. Now I'm going to be worried that someone's taking my temperature every time I walk out of the house. But the first question, Peter, is it true that we can expect Amazon's and other companies similar to that to be delivering, quote, products via drones to our homes in the near future? Or are some doing so now?
There are some, the answer is yes. It's coming and it's happening, and it's already happening now in certain areas. There are pilot programs, and the FAA has made a big step in requiring any operator who's going to deliver packages with a drone, you know, commercial operation, delivering goods with a drone, has to be licensed as a Part 135 operator, which again, that's the same licensing that's required if you wanted to operate a charter service to fly people around. You know, maybe you're going out to Nassau or around down to Key West or something. Any operation that carries passengers that's not a scheduled service is governed by 135, and they've swept in the drone delivery of products by drone. You have to now be licensed as a 135 operator.
Do you happen to know what companies are currently providing this type of service?
Not offhand. There's some information at the FAA's website about these pilot programs, and I believe they list some of the companies there. One of the companies is actually doing within a hospital, a spread out hospital facility where it's like a teaching hospital where there's a distance between the buildings. They're using drones to transport things just for themselves back and forth across the campus. And that was really considered a big step. They actually touted that they were able to transport an organ for donation that had to be moved quickly from where it landed on a helicopter over to the surgery building, and they used a drone to do it. So it's happening, it's coming, and it's going to be, there will be a time when you go out front and a drone drops off a package for you. I think it's coming.
So Peter, everyone is talking about how excellent the presentation is. I certainly agree. Will your slides be available to the attendees? Are you able to send them out?
Yes, actually.
Obviously up to you.
Yeah, I provided a copy to Annabella, and she's going to make them available. I have all these slides that have been put into a PDF format so that you can go through them. And again, all the information, all the links to these FAA sites are all available at my aviation website as well.
And so those are all the questions that I got from the chat, but I do have a question. Okay. What are your thoughts as to, in the future, and this is obviously your hypothesis as to what is the next step, when, and what are we looking at 5 years from now, 1 year from now, 2 years from now, type thing?
Well, I think the biggest issue that's going to come up with drones is you see some of the problems that are going on around the country with, violent protests, things that turn violent. And I think when you look at the capabilities of a drone, that it can carry things, it can carry explosives, it can carry hazardous materials, possibly nuclear materials, dirty bomb type things. To quickly fly a drone in, you looked at some of the operating limitations, 100 miles an hour. But picture this little 10-pound object zooming in at 100 miles an hour. I mean, you're not even going to see it. It's before it's coming and it's gone. And it can be flown into a very critical location quickly. So I think that's where you're going to see the biggest issue with drones is people using them for nefarious purposes, using them in ways to create harm. And that's why you see the FAA is really ratcheting down the requirements. And to be licensed, you have to have a background check. And there's certain requirements as far as, US citizen, legal permanent resident. They're trying to come up with these very harsh penalties. If you, like this poor guy who decided I'm going to fly a drone on Miami Beach to look at the crowds for the Super Bowl. Sounds harmless enough, right? But what if there was some other purpose for doing that? So the FAA shut the airspace down, and unfortunately, you have to comply. And they this 1 year in prison for flying your drone in a place you're not supposed to fly it sounds really tough, but I think they're looking ahead as to where is this going to go. If these drones become weaponized or people start to use them in a harmful way.
That leads me to another question, which is, we have obviously systems in place for weapons, whether it be guns or other types of weapons, but drones, I think you can just buy a drone on Amazon without any type of registration. You have to register the drone to fly it, but is there going to be, or do you think there'll be any type of restriction on people that can buy drones in the future?
I don't see that happening. They have made that clear distinction that you don't have to have a license or a registration to own a drone. You just have to have a register. You have to register it if you're going to operate it. So I think what they've done there is, grandma and grandpa want to buy their teenage grandson a drone for Christmas or for a holiday or birthday or whatever it might be. They're not going to go out and get licensed so that they could just buy it at the store. It's something that you could buy it, as long as you don't operate it, you don't have to register it. It's the person who's actually going to fly it is responsible for licensing, and I don't see that changing.
I don't see any more questions. Does anyone have any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask them directly.
I guess there are no any other questions. Kyla, do you have the certificate number for the CLE presentation?
Yes, I certainly do, and I will be putting that up shortly. I believe that's here.
Peter, it has
Peter's
been a
presentation
great
is-
presentation. Thank you very much for that. I mean, very informative.